The text came on an ordinary Tuesday night in Maple Creek, the kind of quiet evening where the air smells faintly of cedar and detergent, and nothing ever seems to change, until it does. My phone buzzed on the counter beside the dryer, its warm hum filling the small apartment like background noise for a life too organized to be interesting. Then I saw it. Dad, don't contact us. Don't come around. You're on your own now. No greeting. No explanation. Just a single glowing sentence on the same phone I used to call him every Sunday night. I stared at it for a long time, waiting for the punchline that never came. Then, a second notification blinked in, a like reaction from my sister Lydia. A thumbs up emoji, like it was a group joke. I exhaled slowly, let the silence stretch, and typed back the only reply that felt clean. Great. I'll cancel the auto payments first thing tomorrow. And in that tiny, typed line, something in me finally balanced. By midnight, our family chat was chaos. Call us now. What is wrong with you? Don't be dramatic. But I didn't respond. I poured a glass of water, turned off the dryer, and whispered into the empty room. This is what stopping sounds like. It wasn't revenge that it was arithmetic, the emotional kind. For 12 years I had been footing the invisible bills of peace in the Reid family. Groceries, property taxes, utilities, even streaming subscriptions. Each transaction wrapped in silence, disguised as love. I'm Samantha Reid, 29, a financial analyst who could track a company's profit margin to the cent yet somehow forgot to account for my own worth. I'd always handled numbers, that was my job, but the math of family loyalty is different. It bleeds. Dad, Mark Reid, used to say he retired early from a stressful business career, though none of us could remember what the business was. Mom, Elaine, left her job soon after to focus on peace. Peace looked like long naps, long walks, and longer complaints about bills that just appeared out of nowhere, bills I quietly paid. Then there was Lydia, my older sister, glittering on social media with soft filters and softer morals. An influencer in theory, a borrower in practice. Every time a sponsorship fell through or her rent was late, the same story replayed, tears. Promises. Transfers, and always the same line, just this once. But once has a way of becoming always, and always eventually turns invisible. Grandpa Henry Reid saw it before anyone else that he'd tilt his coffee mug toward me during our weekend breakfasts and say, "You can't buy peace, kid. You can only rent it, and the rent's steep." I'd laugh, pretending I didn't get it. But I did. He was the only one who never asked for a thing, and somehow that made me love him more. The truth is, my family didn't collapse overnight. It eroded, small, quiet transactions of self-sacrifice traded for their comfort, until I was nothing but overdraft in human form. So when that text arrived, it wasn't betrayal that it was a receipt. That night, after replying to Dad's message, I sat on the floor beside the humming dryer and let the quiet hum fill the gap where guilt used to live. Then came the buzzing, calls, texts, voicemails, Mom pleading, Dad demanding, Lydia gaslighting. I didn't pick up. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one fixing the leak. I was simply letting it flood. When dawn came, pale light filtering through the blinds, I realized I hadn't slept. The apartment smelled of lavender and detergent, clean, sterile, almost holy. And in that stillness, I finally heard myself breathe. At 6 a.m., my phone rang again, the name that flashed across the screen stopped me, Grandpa Henry. "Morning, kid," he said, his voice low and steady. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I lied. "Good," he said. "Bring your calm face. You'll need it." An hour later, I was driving across Maple Creek. The street still smelled like wet pine from last night's rain. Every corner held a piece of who I used to be, the bakery where Mom once worked before she found her so-called peace, the park where Dad taught me to ride a bike, his hands firm until I was steady enough to fall on my own. Grandpa's house sat on a quiet hill, white paint peeling, coffee scents spilling through the open kitchen window. He was already waiting at the table, 2 mugs steaming, a plate of toast between them, and a thick brown folder sitting dead center like evidence. "You look tired," he said. "I stopped sleeping when I stopped paying," I answered. He nodded, sliding the folder toward me. "You need to see this." Inside were deeds, letters, tax statements, all carrying the same address, Cedar Hill Lane 23, my parents' house. The house I'd grown up in. "I don't understand," I whispered. "You will," he said quietly. "They never owned it, Sam. Not for a single day. It's mine. Always has been." The air thinned. "But they told me." "I know what they told you. They said they were rebuilding, that they just needed time." He sighed. 12 years is a long time for temporary. I looked down at the papers again, the numbers, the signatures. It was all there. My parents hadn't just lived rent-free, that they'd lived truth-free. "I gave them 60 days, Grandpa said calmly. To leave. It's time." I felt my pulse in my throat. "They'll say I made you do it." He smiled sadly. "They'll say whatever they need to. But this," he tapped the folder, "this isn't punishment. It's truth catching up. Truth catching up." The words echoed all the way home. By the time I reached my apartment, my phone was already lighting up again with new messages. Dad, Mom, Lydia, each one more desperate than the last. I didn't pick up that. I just whispered, "Let them call." Then I turned off the ringer and sat in the quiet, listening to the sound of balance returning. 2 days later, the group chat had turned into a graveyard of half-cent apologies and emotional invoices. Then a voice note arrived from Lydia, her voice cracked and trembled with self-righteous rage. "You think cutting us off makes you better? You've ruined everything." I didn't reply. I'd finally learned that silence travels farther than anger ever could. That same morning, Grandpa called again. "They got the letters," he said. "And they're spinning. Your dad called me cruel. Your mom says she can't believe I'd do this to family." I let out a slow breath. "You knew they'd say that." He chuckled softly. "People only call it cruelty when the free ride ends." At work, spreadsheets blurred before my eyes. My hands moved on autopilot. Numbers were finally neutral again, not emotional, not family. That night, I drove back to Grandpa's house. The place felt anchored, smelling of coffee and sawdust, like time itself trusted him. He was sealing 3 envelopes. "They'll get these tomorrow," he said. "What are they?" "Certified copies of the notice. Paper doesn't flinch when people cry." He slid one across the table. "Notice of termination of occupancy, 60 days. His signature clean and unapologetic. I traced the letters with my fingertip. "They'll hate me for this." He looked up, eyes steady. "They already do. Not because you hurt them, but because you stopped bleeding for them." Something inside me cracked, not pain, but release. That night, I opened my laptop. The blue light washed over my face like truth. Click. Water bill, click. Electricity, click, property taxes. One by one, I canceled every auto payment tied to Cedar Hill Lane 23. With each confirmation, the air grew lighter. When I reached the final one, Lydia's streaming account, I paused for a second, then pressed cancel. The next morning, the backlash came like a storm. "Dad, how could you do this to your own parents?" "Mom, we raised you better." "Lydia, you're dead to me." I read them all while sipping my coffee and whispered to the empty room. "Good. Let the old version die." That evening, Grandpa called. "They'll fight," he warned. "When comfort ends, people panic." "Let them," I said quietly. "I'm done renting peace." He laughed softly, proud. "That's my girl." And for the first time in years, I slept without checking my phone. The silence that followed wasn't empty, that it was earned. By the time Saturday rolled around, Maple Creek was wrapped in low fog that clung to the hills like it was guarding old secrets. Inside my apartment, I brewed coffee and opened my phone to a digital wildfire. Lydia had posted a crying selfie, caption. "We're being thrown out of our own home. Sometimes family turns into strangers. Pray for us." She'd chosen the soft filter kind of lighting that makes even lies look holy. Within hours, the post exploded, sympathy flooding in from strangers who only knew our highlight reels. So heartbreaking. Money changes people. Can't believe your sister would do this. Each comment landed like a pebble thrown at glass. I scrolled through them in silence, the mug cooling between my palms. I didn't type a word, because silence was finally louder. Then came the calls, Aunt Rose first, voice trembling with carefully rehearsed shock. "Honey, what on earth is going on? Your mom says they're being evicted." "They are," I said evenly. "Evicted? From their own home?" "Not their home," I corrected. "Grandpa's. They've lived there rent-free for 12 years. He's ending it." On the other end, I heard her breath catch, that small sound of certainty cracking. "Oh. I see." That one syllable, "oh," carried the weight of every illusion my parents had built. By evening, Uncle Dan texted. "Not surprised. Always knew Mark was milking Henry." And our cousin Emma, the family's self-appointed social media detective, sent me Lydia's post with 3 words attached. "Still love you though." The tides were turning, not because of me, but because truth has a way of surfacing when the performance starts to smell. Sunday afternoon, Grandpa Henry sent an email that felt like thunder rolling over Maple Creek. Subject line: facts regarding the residents at Cedar Hill Lane. The message was calm, formal, impossible to twist. The property at Cedar Hill Lane 23 is legally owned by me, Henry Reid. My son Mark Reid and his family have lived there rent-free since 2013. They have not paid utilities, taxes, or maintenance for over a decade. My granddaughter Samantha Reid has covered these costs entirely from her own income for the past 4 years. I have issued a 60-day notice for them to vacate. This decision was mine alone. Being family does not exempt anyone from responsibility. Within minutes, the family thread erupted, replies of shock, apology, confusion. By nightfall, Lydia's post began shrinking, sympathy emojis vanishing, replaced by quiet retractions and brave truth-tellers quoting Grandpa's email right under her caption. The algorithm changed. So did the narrative. Mom doubled down at the one place she still had an audience, the church. During prayer requests, she stood trembling in the pew, voice perfectly tuned to heartbreak. "Please pray for us," she whispered. "Our children have turned against us. We're losing our home." By evening, the rumor mill spun again, new victims, same story. I ignored it until my old Sunday school teacher, Mrs. Crane, called Grandpa for clarity. He told her the same way he used to tell bedtime stories, line by line, slow, truthful, impossible to embellish. When he hung up, even Mrs. Crane sounded embarrassed for believing otherwise. "They'll keep playing the victim," he said to me later that night. "Until the audience leaves." He was right, but what came next showed just how much they'd rehearsed their performance. 3 days later, a new message appeared in my inbox. Sender, Caleb Ward. A name I hadn't seen since high school. "Hey Sam. This might sound weird, but I think I stayed at your parents' house through Airbnb last March. Recognize the kitchen from your sister's posts, can send screenshots if you want." My chest went cold. Airbnb? They didn't own that house, Grandpa did. I called him instantly. "Go get the guest book," he said, without hesitation. People who fake ownership love proof of their fake hospitality. The drive to Cedar Hill Lane felt heavier than it should have, like each mile was built from old loyalty. When I pulled up, the porch light glowed faint and accusing. Lydia opened the door. Mascara streaked, voice sharp. "What are you doing here?" "I left some things in the basement," I said evenly. "Just need to grab them." She hesitated. "Make it quick. Mom's upstairs." The air inside smelled of perfume and panic, walls covered in signs, "Welcome guests. Stay cozy." Wi-Fi, Cedar 23. A vacation rental in my grandparents' home. Downstairs, the basement looked like a set for nostalgia, boxes labeled Christmas, Dad's tools, and a small chest marked supplies and notes. Inside lay printed Wi-Fi cards, laminated house rules, and a spiral-bound guest book filled with handwriting. Thank you for the lovely stay. Loved the maple tree view. Paid through Airbnb, will come back next spring. Pages and pages of strangers thanking them for their hospitality. I took photos of every page, hands trembling but mind razor clear. When I climbed back up, Mom was waiting at the top of the stairs, face pale and eyes blazing. What are you doing here? Leaving, I said. And I walked past her without another word. That night, Grandpa and I spread the printed pages across his kitchen table under the old brass lamp that had lit my childhood breakfasts. He read each one carefully, jaw tightening. They turned my house into a motel, he murmured. And still cried victim when I asked them to leave. The next morning, he called his lawyer. 2 days later, the notice changed from 60 days to 14. Unauthorized subletting. Clear violation. Case closed. Even then, the performance didn't stop. Mom called relatives claiming Grandpa was senile, Dad knocked on old neighbors' doors saying I'd forged papers, Lydia went live, tears shimmering under studio lights. Some people manipulate the elderly for money, she said. I just want peace. The acting was flawless, but the audience had started to yawn. Grandpa invited 4 of his oldest friends to his living room, a retired attorney, a neighbor, and 2 men who'd known him since before my father was born. He handed each a neat folder, property deed, screenshots, guest book entries, and a doctor's note confirming his mental clarity. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He simply said, "This is what's real." When the last folder closed, the attorney looked up and said quietly, "They won't spin this anymore, Henry. You've got everything." That night, Lydia's post disappeared, then the ones before it. For the first time in weeks, my phone stayed still, no buzzing, no guilt. 14 days later, they moved out, boxes stacked on the porch, curtains gone, air thick with resentment. Grandpa didn't watch. He didn't need to. I drove by once. The porch looked smaller without their chaos. Under the steps, something glinted, a single key left behind. I parked, stepped out, and picked it up, cold metal, heavy with memory. That night, Grandpa called. "House is empty," he said simply. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "You want me to come by?" "No," he replied. "They need to leave alone." He paused, then added softly. "You did the right thing, kid. You showed them life doesn't come with free refills." I didn't cry. I just looked out at the city lights until they blurred into peace. 12 years of invisible labor, finally accounted for. When the moving truck disappeared down Cedar Hill, the silence that followed felt different, earned, not empty. I stood by the apartment window, breathing air that smelled only like me. Grandpa called that afternoon again. "House is quiet," he said. "They left a cracked flower pot and a key. You want it?" I smiled faintly. "No. I like my life as it is." He chuckled, low and content. Peace doesn't always come from who leaves. Sometimes it comes from who you let go. 2 weeks later, a plain envelope appeared in my mailbox. Return address, Mark Reid. Inside was a half-filled loan form, my name already typed in as co-signer.no. Apology, just another test. For a moment I just stared at it, almost impressed by the persistence of entitlement. Then I laughed, not bitter, not angry, just free. I snapped a photo, texted Grandpa. "Guess they're still digging." He replied. "Then we'll just build higher walls." By evening, my credit was locked down, every account protected. That night, I poured tea, stepped onto the balcony, and let the wind move through me like a blessing. The war was over, all that remained was quiet, the kind you earn by refusing to pay for peace that was never yours. Autumn found its way to Maple Creek before I was ready. The mornings turned brittle and gold, the kind that smell like smoke and endings. People always say closure feels warm. It doesn't. It feels like standing in an empty room that still remembers your voice. Grandpa Henry's house sat on the hill, half hidden by cedar trees shedding needles like forgotten confessions. I'd started stopping by after work, sometimes just to sit on his porch, sometimes to convince myself the quiet didn't need explaining. That day he waved from the doorway, a mug of coffee steaming in his hand. "You're early," he said. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Then we'll let the silence talk for us." We watched the fog roll down the valley, the town below shrinking into soft outlines. For a long time neither of us spoke, until he finally murmured, "You know, peace can be loud when you're not used to it." I smiled. "It feels unnatural." "That's how you know it's real," he said. Later, over soup, he pulled an envelope from his pocket. "Found something Ruth kept for you." Inside lay a faded photograph of Grandma and me in pigtails, her kneeling to tie my shoelace. On the back, in her looping script, "For the day she learns to stand without asking." I stared at the words until they blurred. "She knew," I whispered. "She always did," Grandpa said softly. "Your grandma could smell weakness the way most people smell rain. But she never mocked it, she just waited for the moment it turned into strength." The clock ticked between us, marking something heavier than time. "You think they'll ever apologize?" I asked. He shook his head. "People addicted to pity don't say sorry, they say remember when we were happy." As if nostalgia is forgiveness. When I drove home that night, the streets looked unfamiliar, like someone had redrawn my town with clearer lines. I realized the distance wasn't physical, it was emotional, the kind you earn by finally seeing the map for what it is. Sleep wouldn't come. I brewed tea, sat by the window, and opened my phone. The family chat was still there, muted but alive, an old wound still breathing under the bandage. One swipe could delete my thumb hovered, but I couldn't, not yet. Forgiveness wasn't a button, it was slow arithmetic. Instead, I scrolled through photos, birthdays, beach trips, those posed smiles. Every image felt edited by denial. Behind every candle, a debt. Behind every hug, an invoice disguised as love. For the first time, I saw it clearly, I had been the accountant of everyone else's comfort. A week later, the lawyer emailed. Inspection complete. House secure. No damages. Attached were 12 photos, empty rooms flooded with daylight. The walls looked almost relieved. I stared at the screen until the brightness hurt. That house had held my childhood, the scraped knees, the laughter, the lies, and now it held nothing. Nothing, and somehow, everything I needed to learn. Days blended. Work meetings. Quiet dinners. The small, healing rituals of a life no longer built on crisis. Then, on a cold Thursday morning, Grandpa called. "Come over. Bring your calm face." When I arrived, boxes lined the hallway. "Packing?" "Sorting," he corrected. "You can tell a lot about a life by what it decides to keep." We opened boxes of old letters, bills, photographs, decades of proof that existence had happened. In one envelope marked 2013 I found the first receipt of the house taxes, my signature in blue ink. I hadn't remembered signing it. "You kept these?" I asked. "You paid them," he said simply. "Didn't want history to forget." He poured more coffee, his hand steady despite the years. "Kid, truth ages well. Lies, they spoil fast." I laughed quietly. "So this is your archive of rot?" "Exactly," he smiled. That weekend I helped him repaint the front fence. The smell of fresh white paint mixed with pine resin. Neighbors waved, some stopping to chat. One of them, Mrs. Coleman, leaned over the gate. "Heard your folks moved to Riverbend. Costly area for people who claim they're broke." I just shrugged. "They'll manage." She nodded, half gossip, half pity. Your granddad's proud of you, you know. He's the only one who ever wanted me to stop paying for everyone else's mistakes. Her eyes softened. Then I hope you charge interest now. We both laughed. That evening, Grandpa sat with a whiskey he rarely touched. You ever wonder why they texted that night? He asked suddenly. I knew the answer but said nothing. Because they thought you'd beg, he said. And when you didn't, it scared them. They learned that silence can't be manipulated. I stared at the amber in his glass. I used to think silence was cruel. It's merciful, he said. It tells the truth without the shouting. The first frost arrived 2 mornings later. I woke to the phone ringing, unknown number, against better judgment, I answered. Mom's voice. Samantha, your father's sick. He needs help. A pause thickened the air. Help? I repeated. We just need a place to stay for a few weeks, until things stabilize. Old reflexes stirred, the one that reached for my wallet, not my heart, but then I heard Grandpa's voice in memory, silence is merciful. I'm sorry, Mom, I said softly. I can't. You'd really leave us like this? You left first, I whispered. She didn't reply. Only breathing, heavy and angry, then the line went dead. By December, his health had started to fade, small things at first, forgetting names, dropping spoons. He joked about it, but I noticed the tremor in his hand whenever he reached for his coffee. We spent Christmas together, just the two of us, a quiet dinner by the fire. He gave me a small box wrapped in newspaper. Inside was a brass key, the one from under the porch. You keep it, he said. You've already earned it more than anyone. What do you want me to do with the house? I asked. Live. Whatever that means for you. He leaned back, eyes closed, whispering. Peace isn't a gift, Sam. It's a lease you renew every morning. 3 weeks later, I got the call from the nurse, heart failure. Peaceful. When I entered the house, the clock on the wall still ticked, and his coffee mug sat half full on the table, beside it, a folded note. Don't be sad. Keep the porch light on for truth. I sat in his chair until dawn, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and realizing that silence, once again, was teaching me something new. The funeral was small, neighbors, old friends, a few faces I didn't know. Lydia didn't come. Neither did Mom or Dad. I spoke anyway. My grandfather believed that honesty outlives inheritance. He taught me that peace doesn't mean everyone's happy, it means you finally are. Afterward, as people drifted away, the pastor said, You sound like him. That's the best compliment I've ever been given. That evening I went back to the hill alone. Snow had started falling, soft, unhurried that I stood by his porch, the key cold in my palm. For years, I'd paid for a peace that never belonged to me, and now, holding that key, I realized, the price was finally settled. Still, one truth lingered in the air like unfinished business. My parents wouldn't stop at silence. I could feel it. And I was right. February came like an unanswered message, gray, hesitant, full of pauses. I'd been visiting Grandpa Henry's grave once a week, bringing coffee instead of flowers. He would have liked that. The inscription still looked new. Henry Reid, he paid his debts in truth. I'd sit, sip, and tell him about the ordinary things, the weather, my work, the way peace had stopped feeling like guilt, until one afternoon, the peace trembled. A letter waited on my doorstep. No return address, inside, a single sheet. We're contesting the will. You manipulated him, see you in court. No signature, but the handwriting was my father's. Of course it was. At first, anger didn't come. Only weariness, the kind that seeps into the bones when you realize some people will drown just to prove you didn't throw them a rope. I called the lawyer. He sighed, already expecting it. They don't have a case, Samantha. But they'll try anyway, not for money, for narrative. He was right. For people like my parents, truth wasn't something to accept, it was a story to out-talk. The first hearing took place in a small county courthouse smelling faintly of paper and disinfectant. Dad arrived in an expensive suit he couldn't afford. Mom clutched a handkerchief like a prop. Lydia wore sunglasses indoors, always performing, even without a camera. When the judge asked for statements, Dad spoke about undue influence. Mom dabbed her eyes. Lydia whispered loudly enough for the courtroom to hear. She isolated him. She wanted everything. I didn't interrupt that. I just waited for the lawyer to hand over the evidence, the guest book photos, the Airbnb listings, the bank records showing my payments, Grandpa's handwritten letters verifying his decisions. Each page landed like a metronome, steady, factual, undeniable. By the end, the room had run out of pity to sell. The judge spoke calmly. Mr. and Mrs. Reid, there is no evidence of coercion. The estate remains with Ms. Reid. Case dismissed. Dad's jaw tightened. Mom gasped softly. Lydia stared at the floor, mascara trembling. The gavel struck once, not loud, just final. Outside, snow drifted across the parking lot. Dad lit a cigarette, though he'd quit years ago. You really think this makes you better than us? He said. No, I answered. Just freer. He exhaled smoke that smelled like surrender. You'll regret this someday. Maybe, I said. But at least it'll be my regret. He looked at me, truly looked, and for the first time I saw it. Not rage, not hate, just emptiness, the kind that feeds on excuses. He turned, walked to the car, and didn't look back. Mom lingered. You become so cold, she whispered. No, I said quietly. Just warm to myself now. Her lips parted as if to argue, but the wind stole her voice. She followed him into the car, and they drove away, two silhouettes shrinking into gray distance. That night, I couldn't stop shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of release, the kind that makes your hands remember every boundary you ever forgot to draw. I brewed tea, wrapped myself in Grandpa's old cardigan, and stepped out onto the balcony. The city lights below blinked like scattered promises finally kept. Somewhere in that glow, a version of me had stopped existing, the one who mistook obedience for love. Weeks passed, spring edged into the air, tentative, almost embarrassed after so much cold. I returned to Cedar Hill for the first time since the trial. The house looked gentler now, as if relieved that no one was lying inside it anymore. The maple tree out front had begun to bud, stubborn proof that some roots survive anything. Inside, dust hung in the sunlight like memory refusing to leave. That I walked from room to room. The kitchen where Mom used to hum, the hallway where Lydia practiced her fake apologies, the window seat where I'd once dreamed of escape. Every sound that used to echo with tension now answered only with silence. A clean silence, not absence, but closure. I placed the brass key on the counter. Thank you, I whispered, not to the house. To the version of me that once believed I had to earn belonging. Outside, a little boy rode his bike past the gate, waving. You moving in? He shouted. I smiled. Maybe. Still deciding. He grinned and pedaled away, leaving tire tracks shaped like new beginnings. I stood there for a long time, listening to the wind move through the trees. It sounded like breathing, slow, steady, alive. That evening I drove to the cliff above the valley, Grandpa's favorite lookout. From there, the whole town glimmered under dusk. I took out his last letter and read it again under the fading light. Kid, silence is not the absence of love. It's the space where love learns its real shape. I folded it carefully, pressed it against my chest, and said into the wind. I get it now. The air was cold, but the truth was warm. Over the next months, life returned quietly. I started teaching free finance classes at the community center, mostly single parents and young women trying to rebuild. Each time I told them the same thing. Kindness without boundaries is self-eviction. You have to pay rent on your peace, but you choose the landlord. They'd laugh softly, half understanding, half remembering their own lessons in pain. Sometimes, after class, someone would linger and ask, "How did you learn that?" And I'd smile, thinking of Grandpa, of Cedar Hill, of 12 unpaid years finally settled. The hard way, I'd say. One afternoon, a letter arrived, this time with a return address, Riverbend Assisted Living. Mom's handwriting. Your father isn't well that we won't ask for money, just a visit. I stared at it for a long time. Old instinct stirred, the ache of unfinished history, but beneath it, a quieter voice whispered, peace doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen. The next morning, I drove to Riverbend, not out of duty, out of clarity. Dad was thinner, his once loud presence reduced to small gestures. When he saw me, he tried to stand, then sank back, breathless. You came, he said. I did. We sat in silence until he spoke again. I was wrong about a lot of things. I didn't rush him. Your grandfather, he was a better man than me. I nodded. He never wanted to be better. He just wanted to be honest. He smiled faintly, the first genuine one I'd seen in years. Guess I never learned how. You just did, I said. When I left, Mom followed me to the hallway. Thank you, she whispered. For coming. Take care of him, I said. That's all that matters now. Her eyes filled. You really forgive us? I don't need to, I said gently. I just stopped needing an apology. Outside, the air smelled like rain and soil, the scent of things trying again. That I drove home with the windows down, letting the wind fill the spaces where anger used to live. When I reached my apartment, the first thing I did was turn on the porch light, just like Grandpa asked. Then I poured a cup of tea, stood by the window, and whispered into the night. It's done. Weeks later, the maple trees bloomed in full green. Cedar Hill had been sold to a young family, laughter returning to walls that once echoed guilt. Sometimes I'd drive by, see toys in the yard, curtains open, and feel nothing but gratitude. Because healing, I learned, isn't about reclaiming old spaces. That it's about walking past them without flinching. The last line of Grandpa's letter stayed pinned above my desk. If the world ever tries to make you pay rent for peace again, hand them this letter and walk away. I still read it every morning before work, a ritual, a reminder, a boundary disguised as wisdom. So here's what I've learned. Silence isn't the end of a story. It's the punctuation that finally makes sense of the sentence. You can spend your life buying comfort from people who mistake dependence for love, or you can let the silence invoice them in full. And when you finally stop paying for peace, you'll find it waiting, quietly, at your own door. If this story found you tonight, maybe it's time to check what debts you're still paying in someone else's name, and maybe, just maybe, it's time to stop.